Welcome to San Diego Comic-Con at Home 2021. We are talking about neurotic superheroes and the writers who love them. And I will let the writers introduce themselves. We'll go through the order you appear on my screen. Brian Q. Miller, who are you? What are you known for?
I have written on Smallville. I've written on various TV shows since Arrow and Flash, Sleepy Hollow, most recently Motherland Fort Salem, and am a head writer on the new He-Man cartoon that comes out on Netflix later, hopefully this year. Not Kevin Smith's, but the other one. And also Stephanie Brown Backroll Run, did a bunch of Smallville comics as well. So I've been around for a little bit.
Marv Wolfman.
That's me. What am I known for? Let's say at Marvel, things like Blade and Black Cat and Bullseye and a bunch of others. At DC, Teen Titans, Deathstroke, Crisis on Infinite Earths, some novels, and some other stuff too.
Brian Michael Bendis, what have you done?
I just have a lot of questions about the He-Man cartoon, but I co-creator Miles Morales, Jessica Jones, Maria Hill, Powers, Pearl, Scarlet, and now at DC Comics, Naomi, which is coming to the CW, like you do, soon. So, and I'm now at the moment writing Justice League, which means I'm writing all the characters.
Louis Simonson.
Oh gosh. Well, let's see. Start off with Power Pack, went to X Factor and the New Mutants, and then probably over to DC where I did Man of Steel and Steel, and then back to Marvel, back and forth all over the place. So probably those are my ones people mostly know me for.
Danny Fingroth.
Was the group editor of Marvel Spider-Man line and wrote Darkhawk and Dazzler. I only write things that start with DA, because my name starts with DA. So I wrote a bunch of Spider-Man. In the years since, I have written a bunch of books. I think the one that probably brings me directly to this panel is Superman on the Couch, what superheroes really tell us about ourselves and our society. And most recently, I've written the biography of Stan Lee, A Marvelous Life, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee, that came out in 2019. And I even read the audiobook.
And I am Dr. Travis Langley, Distinguished Professor of Psychology at Henderson State University, best known as the author of the book Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, and editor and head nerd of the herd on a dozen other books. Thank you all for joining us. As I was telling the panelists before, this began a few years ago when Danny made a comment to me, we should do a panel on who's the most neurotic superhero. And he was kind of joking. I thought, no, we could do that. We've done that many times. And this one is the inevitable follow-up. Neurotic superheroes and the writers who love them. And we're going to find out why in the world and how and which superheroes they love. I'll start off with a little psychology. What in the world do we mean by neurotic? It's a Freudian word. It's not really a modern diagnostic term in the DSM, although some professionals still really prefer to use it for certain things. But it's very much a part of the common language. It means somebody who is really handling stress badly, and maybe their personality is defined by things such as their angst and their poor self-concept. One way of viewing is that the person's using the ego defense mechanisms poorly. The defense with the C is because, well, it was originally translated in British English. A lot of different tricks we play on ourselves to protect ourselves from anxiety. So one way of defining the neuroses or neurotic behaviors was that a person is using the defense mechanisms poorly. Either they're using them too much, like constant denial, refusing to admit anything to themselves, or they're not using them enough to protect themselves from stress. So one person might be a bundle of angst because they're not using some of these enough, or they might use some of them poorly, like when Spider-Man's sense of humor makes somebody angry and that wasn't actually what he was shooting for. Some people use these too much to where they go into denial or alcohol abuse or many other unhealthy behaviors. We've seen plenty of superheroes that people might think of as neurotic. You didn't look at that too much the first couple decades. Hard to talk about superheroes with problems without talking about this guy, Batman, who's defined by his trauma, who spends his life devoted to one tragic thing that happened to him once upon a time. one way or another, everybody here has written, or in Danny's case, edited something with Batman. So panelists, anybody weigh in with your thoughts? What is it about Batman, not just that makes him stand out, but is there anything that's even healthy about the guy? Why have people always loved this guy who's felt compelled to dress like a bat?
Because everybody had something bad at years old that they can't let go of.
He's cool, right? Like I think I've found that the older I get, specifically with Batman, which I'm sure will get me, whatever online, but he seems silly at times, like as I get older, because as I go through being an adult and therapy and dealing with adult problems, when you're 7 or 12, you're like, oh yeah, of course he dresses like a bat, he gets a badass car, and he goes like that's what you do. And then as you get older, you're like, or you don't do all of that. So I think there's some escapism to it with him, but also I can't help as I get older just thinking he's a little silly sometimes.
Jim Shooter used to say, if only the power could be harnessed for good. And I think that part of Batman's appeal is he's taken that darkness inside himself and tried to turn it to good rather than evil. He could have gone either way based on that first traumatic experience. And yet he's tried to do the right thing with it. Whether or not he always succeeds is a whole nother thing, but at least his heart's kind of in the right place.
Well, when you see like the city that he's in, which I think is just as much a character, Gotham, and what it has done to the other members of that narrative, when you see his rogues gallery and you see everyone else, I think that stands out much more in that he gets the road not taken. He could have gone that way and been that guy, but instead he's this guy. And to extrapolate on that, I think when the legacy characters come in and when the wards come in and when all of the kind of younger tier of his sidekicks and his adopted family, when they come into play, he gets healthier as it goes, because then it's not just about keeping the city from turning out in a way like he did, but he's giving this younger tier guidance that he never got when he was going. Like, they don't have to dress up like a bat to deal with their stuff. I think it gets richer the more of them when they come into play.
Also, there's the obvious contrast to Superman. I mean, Superman had emerged in comics 1 year earlier, the start of the superhero comics in 1938. And while a bunch of other people were trying to cobble together Superman copies, Finger and Kane came up with one who twist it in ways, instead of the superhuman godlike guy who, despite acting like a neurotic Clark Kent, seems overall pretty darn healthy. Here you've got this guy who he's got issues. Does he have bats in his belfry?
The big difference in so many ways between the two characters is that Superman never faced watching his parents, watching an entire world die. He was too young. He had no concept of what happened. He had no idea that once he landed on Earth, that he came from another planet, let alone a planet that had exploded. He didn't see his parents gunned down in front of him, so his entire morality was set by the two people who happened to adopt him. And they were absolutely wonderful people who did not lead into the you have to hate the bad guys or anything. They were taught him about what was good and what was right, not what was a little bit fanatical.
Yeah, Len Wein and I were talking about that one time, and Len said, what really worked out is that we're all fortunate that Superman happened to land where he got the best parents on Earth.
Gee, it's almost like his story was written.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun to see Spider-Man and Batman on that cover. I mean, they're both, people who rose above this traumatic loss. That's, sort of what's admirable about them and what makes them not villains, that they rise above it as opposed to feeling sorry for themselves and giving into it.
Of course, Superman has had his stranger moments in his history, certainly where he seemed to be pretty full of himself, a whole lot of things that are known as super dickery. Is Superman actually healthy? I know Brian Miller, and I apologize even to the audience for the fact that I'm going to have to call two of these Brians by their last names. Miller, when you were writing Smallville, a number of characters would keep referring to Clark as Boy Scout, even as his code name, playing on the fact that they saw him as being this strong, or at least goody two-shoes kind of guy.
It was a big part of his upbringing with the Kents, and I think especially in the Smallville context, where there was so much lead up and so much runway before Superman, he had more room for, we had smaller moments, I think, of the super dickery, like as he was growing up, but it's, in a way, it's more palatable and excusable because even though it was a 30-year-old actor, the character was a teenager who was going through it, and they're not fully baked yet. Like, those cookies aren't done. And so there are moments when they are allowed to, have their moments of self-reflection and doubt and make the wrong decision, and we give them a little bit more of a pass. So it was, I found it to be a very interesting kind of look into a man who is, the audience on one level knows is destined to have that kind of power and destiny and where he's going, but seeing it through the step-by-step, just of a kid who's growing up with expectation and self-expectation and power, and how can he not wind up being a little neurotic about that, because he's got to be like, that's what Superman in the show came out of, Clark Kent choosing to try and preserve those two parts of his life versus landing in a story in 1938 where there's just the two. It was a very conscious decision of his to become a symbol for people, kind of in a way that his parents were for him. So it's I think it's really fun seeing those heroes, especially in the younger, more malleable phases, is super interesting.
What you're seeing is a peek into the psyche of the writers and the editors. So when you say it's Superman super dickery and using his powers in a petty way, well, it's in some way the fantasy of the people who were writing and editing, their fantasies combined with what they thought would sell, but to sort of go, well, this guy is so powerful that he's almost unrelatable, so let's bring him down to this petty level that our 8-year-old readers can relate to.
And you all have written something with Superman along the way. Two of you have written first issues of Superman comics, as a matter of fact. Danny, what's the joke you always make when we have that title, Who's the Most Neurotic Superhero?
Spoiler alert, Spider-Man, no surprise. It's just, he had it built into his origin.
Guilt. Right there.
Guilt, shame. And of course, you could make a case that really it's highly neurotic for him to blame himself. That's such a long reach to go, it's my fault that the burglar killed, I get it, and it makes a great origin, but really it's a pretty big psychological reach to say it's my fault that Uncle Ben is dead.
But Peter is 16 years old at this point. Right. He's going to assume that he's the one who screwed up. It comes with age. It comes with that, how young he is, where he totally feels that he's always being put down. It's his fault. It's his problem.
And that is important when we talk about a term like neurotic. What is neurotic for a 30-year-old, a 50-year-old, might just fall within
I know all those answers. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Miller was talking about Clark in Smallville, and Marv just brought up about Peter Parker. These are characters who, they haven't even learned how to handle these things yet. So it's going to be very different when they're younger. Yeah. Peter has become kind of the poster boy for the neurotic superhero, and that seems to be some of his popularity. And of you all, I do believe Mr. Bendis has written more Spider-Man, not just than all the rest of you, but just about anybody. Maybe anybody but Dan Slott.
No, I'm 100 issues ahead of Dan Slott, and I'm never going to let him forget it. But towards the end of my run, we were all offered this opportunity to do a project called Generations, where if there was a legacy character attached to the the franchise, that they could meet each other, right? And so I had an opportunity for young Miles to go back in time and meet young Peter Parker. Now, he's already met adult Peter Parker and has been mentored by him and gotten some wisdom and seen a lot. But he goes back in time and meets I specifically found an issue of a Ditko issue where Peter, it's just really nothing's going well. It's a real Steve Ditko issue of Spider-Man where it's just really, and it was then, and I gotta say, I didn't know where I was going with it when we started, but from Miles' perspective, and Miles has both of his parents and a best friend and friends, and then he meets Peter, who has no friends, and people are being viciously cruel to him for just walking by. He's an abused child. He's depressed orphan. He's being abused by everyone. He has no friends. And for Miles to see that, like, this isn't a neurotic kid. This is a depressed child. Like, this is something, there's a pile of issues going on here. And it was then that Miles realized, well, boy, oh boy, first of all, how impressive that Peter has been able to like rise to the occasion of a hero when all of that was dumped on him. Right. And also Miles was able to see privilege in which his life was, how he became Spider-Man was almost a privilege in comparison to what happened to Peter. Right. And it completely changed like how he's Spider-Man. I was so grateful for that. That's such a comic book thing. Like, I would never have had Miles go back in time to the Steve Ditko thing unless an editor goes, we're doing this, right? And I'm like, all right, well, what could I do? Do I want to do that? What could I do with it? And when I got there, I found more truth in that one issue than I did in the last 100 that I wrote. Like, Miles saw something he never would have guessed. And also, I don't think a lot of the audience perceives Peter back in those days as depressed and neurotic as he is. I mean, yeah, there's guilt ridden. He literally looks at the camera every issue and says, I have guilt. But the other elements, like no one is kind to him. No, but the nicest person to him is Betty Brant, and she's only nice to him a third of the time. Right. And so his bosses are mean. And again, I as I told Danny, when I read his book on Stan, it had, and I had read, like all of us here, had read all of the books or had lived through some of it. But you realizing that Stan was putting a lot of his own personal issues with his father and what he was forced to do as a young man. Like, he had to enter the publishing world as a young man, because like the audience still to this day goes, who gets to work at a major metropolitan newspaper at 15? Right. But Stan did. He was working where he shouldn't have been at age 15, and he was clearly angry about it, and wrote it into Spider-Man. And it was and he brought truth, and that truth is the thing he's most famous for. It's such a multi-layered lesson for writers.
And I think it was the constant tug of war between him and Ditko for who this character was.
Yes.
I think made the character something, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Again, we're looking at 3 panels where he literally looks at the panel and goes, ah, right? People can identify with that a great deal. Batman actually doesn't do that, right? We just watch Batman go, hey, what's his deal? Right? Where Peter will tell you what his deal is.
In a meta way, like, especially looking at these panels, like in talking about how, Spidey is perceived as compared to when we look at Batman, we look at Superman, like in these specifically, he's journaling. Like, when you look at it, like as a teenager, like, I'm sure if you wanted to put those bubbles in, you could do that in a Batman thing where suddenly it's like an episode of Burn Notice where it's like, oh, this is how you pick a lock. And then he starts going through all the steps of everything. And just in the same way Peter does, it's just presented as kind of one of the fundamental foundational, this is part of the iconography of Peter, is that we get to go in there and walk around in all of his self-doubt and his guilt.
Peter, I'm Jewish. I see a lot of Judaism in Spider-Man, even though on paper it is not a Jewish character. That's the thing I goof around with Dan Slott a lot about, because I think Peter Parker's Jewish. And your book, Danny, your book completely convinced me I was right, by the way. I was always like, I defer that there's no evidence of this, but now I feel that there is. And as a neurotic Jewish teenager in New York, a lot makes sense, right? And where the guilt comes in, my Catholic friends and I will always like who's more guilt ridden? Like it's a contest. but it's a universal truth that we all live with, that we can identify with and see it as real and truthful. And we also know that if we had superpowers, that would not make the guilt go away.
Somehow Stan and Jack and Stan and Steve into these fears that I had, but obviously a lot of people had, and just universalized it. And it was really they touched the inner neurotic in all of us.
What is the thing that connects these three characters? They're all orphans.
Oh, yeah.
And that means
all the best heroes are.
Now I two of my children are adopted, and they're orphans and know it and wear it. And you see on a day-to-day basis how they process that, how they process it at 8, how they process it at 15, how they process it as they go older. And it's a big part of why people connect to these characters so much, is because no matter where you are in your process, they're telling the truth.
Actually, I had a conversation with Stan once about why almost all of his heroes were orphans. And he was like, I just didn't really think about it. And part of his parents get in the way, but for the most part, he just didn't want to think about their parents.
But Danny knows I have such a feeling about this. And when anytime Stan says, I didn't mean it, I think that's the real stuff. I think that's like, that was where his pain was. That is where his trauma was. And may he not want to share it on like, look you in the eye and share it like that, but he shared it in every issue. That you can't make that stuff up. That's his real pain.
That pain that they brought in, that seems to be what that Marvel Revolution was, what they brought to their heroes in the 60s, starting with the Fantastic Four here. And it was like one after another, they're bringing a whole bunch of neurotic characters, which were different from what people had been accustomed to with the comics. Marv, you did a run on Fantastic Four, right?
Yeah.
You break them up?
No, I got them back.
Oh, okay.
I was so sick and tired of everyone coming in and breaking up the group. And I went, no, they're coming back as a group. These are the 4. They're fantastic. And they're going to be the stars, not somebody else.
Captain America. It was one of the things that they took an old character that Simon and Kirby had created, who had been very popular but pretty two-dimensional, and they give him guilt over dead Bucky, and made him a man out of time. What's that?
And then some.
And then some.
Right. I mean, again, somebody who has suffered tremendous loss. The loss of his whole world. I mean, it's the Rip Van Winkle story filtered again through Stan and Jack, and this guy is moping around, kind of like a teenager, except he's not. He's supposed to be an adult.
It's such a serious subject, but we all know that Jack went through some real terrible stuff during World War II, and every once in a while you really see him pour a lot of whatever was going on, either consciously or subconsciously, through this character. And I think what's so interesting about this, coming back now we're decades out of where the character was created as a jingoistic punch Hitler thing, and now he's like, war is awful, and you see it right on these pages. This is a veteran. This is someone dealing with issues.
Doctor Strange was made full of himself. Tony Stark had been made full of himself. It was later, right? I think it was David Michelini who made him an alcoholic, although Denny O'Neil was the one who really played that story out. Well, I mean, Denny said outright that he thought the original alcoholism story had been dealt with too quickly. And Denny, by his repeated admission, had an alcohol problem in his own history. And so he was really playing that out. So you don't necessarily have to talk about yourselves, but it could be just writers in general. Do y'all deliberately play out your own problems through these superheroes you write?
Well, duh. How else could you do it?
Yeah, it's hard not to. I mean, it's that there's that whole school of thought that's like keep your politics out of like the stuff that you're writing, and it doesn't even have to be political, but it's really, and you can do it, you can turn it on and off, but it's really hard to not have your stuff flow through that person, because you're like, oh, well, if I was in this situation, what would I do? And then you can do, you can parse that out and have the character behave differently, but there's some element to each of those stories that has something to do with your own worldview or personal experience or neurosis. It's like therapy in a way, I think, in a big way, just having the character react for you in ways you wish you could or you couldn't, just to see what would happen.
This guy.
Now we're talking about some issues.
Now we're talking some issues. Marv was the one who created Bullseye, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, I got my Marv trivia right this time.
Thank you, Marv.
My
Sincerely.
pleasure. Trust me. I loved it. Though I do feel the people who followed me did it better. And no joke.
Why is it Bullseye the one who emerges as being seen so much as an arch enemy to Daredevil other than Kingpin?
He crossed the line.
For me, being there at the time, Kingpin was Spider-Man's enemy. He wasn't Daredevil's enemy. In fact, at that point, I don't believe they even had met. So when Frank added in Kingpin, it was a good year or so, or maybe 2 years after my run. So there would have been no thinking on my side to have Kingpin suddenly enter. What I wanted was a character because of who could get in under Daredevil's radar senses. So you're not going to see a card being flung that would cut his trachea or something, because that would be too fast and it wouldn't register as something that was dangerous. So I wanted a character who could come in and avoid all of those problems. You can't win in a close-up battle, a punch 'em up with Daredevil if you're an ordinary character. When I was on Daredevil and Frank and company were eventually got onto it, the way we did comics changed an awful lot. I was still writing for a younger audience. The audience who was reading Marvel at that point was probably 12 to 14 to 16, something like that. Within a few years, and certainly what Frank did with Elektra and then with Bullseye as well, it began, the readership was coming up to 18, 19, 20. And you could do totally different type of stories and much more in-depth stories and more psychological stories at that age than you can if your readers are all 12.
Mm-hmm.
Like it all felt very organic to me as I was maturing mentally as you were as writers.
You're a Daredevil. I mean, it does feel like it's mature. It matured from what Miller had been doing. You got to go further in a number of different ways.
Yeah, there was a lot to unpack from going all the way back. So what we did was we took it back to its pulp roots, like those first issues of Daredevil are a pulp hero comic, dressed like a Marvel comic, and so we went back to that sensibility, and then from there, like our biggest one was like we're at a time where like secrets are hard to keep. Like we see it every day. Like secrets are hard, identities are hard, and I pitched Marvel like there should be one book that someone's secret identity problem should go off the rails and not be put back in the bottle. Like it's just what they have to deal with forever. Like when something happens to a famous person, they're dealing with it forever, right? And wouldn't that be great? And boy, of all the characters and all of the superhero stories, who's been more careless with their secret identity and relationships than Matt Murdock? It's like it seemed that everybody had set this up for us.
Wait, that Mike Murdock business didn't solve everything.
So it was an easy sell because it was already there, and it was like, do we want to take a leap and go for it and really get into a larger story about what our world is like now and how we would treat our heroes, who we found out everything about them. So, and then for a character like Matt Murdock, again, perfect for it because he ain't wired for it at all. Like this challenges him on the deepest parts of his soul, and then pushed him into new areas. And I was really excited about that. And then I also got to explore, I was joking a little bit before, but not really, about, Catholic guilt versus Jewish guilt. And here we are, we're full on Catholic guilt now. So I was writing both Spider-Man and Daredevil together, and then would put them in the book together as often as possible to see if we could, rock and sock robots with their guilt. See what we can do there.
Marvel guilty team up.
Yeah. Damn. I was there for years. I never thought of that. I would have fixed that in 2 seconds. Okay.
Marv.
Yes, sir.
You gave us new Teen Titans, and they weren't quite as happy as Teen Titans had been in previous incarnations. not the old ones like Garfield. You made Gar more insecure, and you introduce a cyborg full of anger.
Yeah, well, I guess if your body's destroyed and you come back as a robot, you would be. Yeah, in his case, it was a matter of the thing he wanted most in life. He was an athlete. He loved sports. He wanted to do all that, and he was good at it. And everything that he was good at was taken away from him. So it took a while for him to acknowledge that what he's become is even more. The initial response was, "Oh my God, I can't do anything anymore. I can't walk the street without being noticed. I can't be on any sports teams. I can't do any of that stuff anymore." And it's got to destroy you when you were about 18.
This one at the time felt like it brought new life to DC in terms of the kinds of stories we're broadening. People have been experimenting with a lot of things, but this one, I don't know, it felt like it just brought this additional layer of humanity that we hadn't seen so much in the DC comics at the time.
People said, and I had to agree, that it was DC's first Marvel comic.
Well, having read it very recently, like I was struck by how literary it is. Like there are like paragraphs of text internalizing their fears and their hopes and what they want and where they're going, and it was very unique in that regard, I think.
Thanks.
Yeah, our original X-Men, of course, there have been so many X-Men over the years. And they wrote Iceman as the most uncertain, but he was the youngest.
Mhm.
Possibly the most neurotic one of all was really Professor X himself. Admittedly, they didn't do too much with this bit with him being in love with Jean.
I know. But really, who wouldn't be in love with Jean?
Stan admitted that was a mistake and quickly retracted it.
But I bring them up partly because I want to get into what happened with the original X-Men when they became X-Factor, and Angel, who'd usually been written as kind of an easygoing rich kid, lost his wings and became actually suicidal. And the suicide of Phoenix had been controversial, but this was honestly the first time I remember one where the superhero was suicidal for any reason other than self-sacrifice.
I always was a little bored by the beautiful, happy Angel who had no neuroses at all. I actually think I love my superheroes to be neurotic. And they're more fun if you're torturing them.
Oh yeah, totally.
You know, if your characters are having a happy life where they're just joyous all day long, you get bored with them really fast. But if you torture them, if you put them in situations that are difficult, they're impossible, if you take away, as Marv said, everything that they love or that they want to be, if you take away their identity, then you find out who they really are. And I wanted to see who Angel really was. So we ripped his wings off, but then we gave him new wings so that he got better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, here it is.
He got more interesting.
Yeah, you bring him back literally blue.
Yes.
He's literally feeling blue when you bring him back.
Well, yes, he was more like feeling red, I suppose, because he was pretty bad. But he got better.
So was it just this one character, or did you try to make sure you were bringing pain where you could with characters you'd consider
totally.
boring?
I mean, don't you all do that? Don't you? I mean, am I the only one who thinks it's fun to put my characters in impossible situations?
And you did it as an editor too, Louise. I was a witness. I watched you make sure that Chris and Bruce and everybody, tortured their characters as much as possible.
You kind of want your readers to have sympathy with the character, or you want them to feel something. And if they're bland, they feel nothing. So that's my theory anyway.
And if the other characters met them and didn't like them, it's because there was some extenuating circumstance in their life that those characters who didn't like them didn't understand, but inside they were suffering, just like you, the reader.
Right. Good. Well said, Danny.
Yeah, Greg Rucka said the best compliment you can get is when a fan reaches out to you. Why do you hate this character? that means you're doing right by them.
I know. And,
Well, I always thought our job was to get people to be so mad at us that they would have to see every issue to see how we were screwing up.
absolutely.
Not get them so mad that they left, but just mad. I gotta see how they're messing up my favorite character now.
You don't want them to trust you. You don't want them to know that they can look away from your book for a couple of issues and nothing will have happened. You want them to desperately need to pick up every issue because they know you're going to do something vile.
Yes, you can't be trusted.
Right, you can't be trusted. That's it.
There's quite a few examples of our peers and stuff, like being too in love with their characters and then not doing anything with them. I kind of refer to it in classes to teddy bear writing, where I love my teddy bear. I don't want anything bad happen to my teddy bear, and you just write it like I love it. I love him so much, and then nothing happens, and then the audience doesn't get mad. They just kind of flitter away. They just kind of get bored, and they don't even consciously know why. They go, "Oh, I've experienced the character, but nothing's happening," so they move on. They're there for the drama. So they'll really, and also the only way you can test the character's resolve and really find out what they're about is shove them up against the wall and see what they do.
When I was asking Danny what he wanted to talk about from his work, you gave me an example of super villains.
Well, this was from my miniseries, The Deadly Foes of Spider-Man. And the whole point of it was to get inside the heads of the villains and see things from the villains' point of view, including, some of them who weren't, who were not too well wired together. So the Shocker, I'm not sure why he's wearing it. Actually, I think obviously it's a nightmare. But this was a period when Marvel, specifically Mark Gruenwald, came up with the idea, I think, of killing a lot of what he considered second string villains, really to free up their names. The names that Marvel had the trademark on, to free them up for other characters. And so it occurred to me, the Shocker never really had much of a personality. So what if he was just obsessed with the fact that the Scourge of Crime, who was the character that Mark was using to go around and kill people, and the Punisher, if you were a neurotic supervillain and you were kind of insecure and you'd been sent to prison for the 11th or 12th or 300th time, maybe and you weren't clever enough to think of changing your costume so that people wouldn't know it was the same guy every time, then yes, you would have nightmares about being found and killed by these people whose job description is, we kill supervillains.
And then we've got this gal that she's not just here because Bendis is. Just Danny and I always like talking about Jessica Jones when we get on this topic.
Well, she's trauma and neurosis first, so that's like her superpower. No, I appreciate it. Also, she's kind of created in the cloth of the Marvel neurotic characters. Like she's birthed into their world as one of them, and we just wanted to explore. The initial premise was like, not everyone gets to be on the A-list. Like not everybody, stays an Avenger, and what's that life like? Well, what happens? And it was based on some articles I read about this actress, pretty well-known actress, who said, "Yeah, I know where the Oscar parties are. I'm not invited to them anymore. Like you're just one day not invited anymore." And writing about that and what happened. Like, well, what knocked you off the pedestal? Like, what was the step too far? And then to have a B-list villain, again, not my words. I don't think there are any, but someone who was at the time perceived as almost like a comedic villain, is actually with the scariest powers in the world, like letting them like get their hands on somebody in a way that they've never got their hands on anybody else before, and what would happen and what would be the fallout. But again, I'm the most proud of the character is that she's gone through all this trauma and all this pain, and she's very, very aware of it. And it never took away her heroic streak, even though she never sees herself as the hero of the story, ever, ever, ever. It's not like she's a reluctant hero. She's a hero in denial. And it was like Carol Danvers has to say, who's paying you to do this? Like, she's always like, I'm a private detective. And then she's like, well, who's paying you to do this? And she realizes she doesn't have a client. She's like that's her excuse to be a superhero. And then when we reveal that, it's hard not to like somebody who's a hero in spite of everything, and even the way they see themselves.
Then we have the parodies.
I don't think this is a parody. I think this is the best
that's my
Batman
favorite.
movie.
That's my favorite version of any Batman. Is that one where I think it's the truest and it's the most honest version of Batman that exists. Is specifically that no is that Lego Batman.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same people that made Spider-Verse. So I see a lot of the reach they had on Spider-Verse happening on Batman here too. I really do. I was trying to go through the whole thing without quoting something from Frank Miller like once in my life, but I'm now I can't stop myself. But when I first came to DC, I was like offered to do some Batman stuff, and I was going through the Batman encyclopedia, like the DK Batman encyclopedia, which I'm sure you have on your shelf back there, Travis. And
Yes.
And in it there was a quote that you probably have read where Frank said that Batman is a very unique character in all of pop culture, that it's the only character you can go that dark and go that silly, and it's still Batman and everyone accepts it.
Yeah, they take the logical shortcomings or the things we pick up here and there and play them to an extreme, but this is one of the best Batman stories ever.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts before we tell the audience where they can find all of you?
I do think I've learned that going back to what Weezy was saying about like torching the characters, we've discovered that the audience, when you ask them what their 5 favorite things about Batman are, they'll talk about pain and neurosis. They won't talk about, oh, that time he did that thing with the jet. They talk about like the personal struggles. Same thing with Clark, same thing with Peter. They talk about, oh, what's your favorite moment? Oh, when MJ left him. Like it's when Gwen Stacy died. It's always like a point of real trauma that or neurosis that the audience can relate to and see as truth.
Panelists, where can people find you? What projects do you have coming up?
I am currently the writer of Justice League and Legion of Superheroes and Checkmate coming soon, depending on when you watch this. And Naomi, which is coming to CW, and I'm working on Cover for HBO Max as an animated with David Mack, and we have some exciting Jinx World news coming very soon.
A couple of X-Men Legends. The first two, well, actually 3 of them. The first two involve X Factor. The third one involves New Mutants. And I'm doing a Power Pack miniseries that should be out this summer.
Cool.
That's all.
Marv, where can people find you?
At the down ramp of the 405, I'm selling roses. Find me on Facebook or Twitter. Not doing any comics at the moment, sadly, but I am writing 2 different video games, and really love doing those.
A Marvelous Life, the main story of Stan Lee, out in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, and because it's not controversial enough to write about Stan Lee, I'm working on projects involving Jack Ruby and Bob Dylan, because there's no controversy about that, guys.
At Brian Q. Miller on Twitter. Later in the year, we will have He-Man and the Masters of the Universe on Netflix. And Motherland Fort Salem that I also wrote for. The season 2 starts on Freeform right around the corner, just a couple weeks out.
I'm easy to find. On Twitter, I'm at Superherologist, which most people will not remember how to spell. And just look for Travis Langley, one of the 10 most followed psychologists, according to the British Psychological Society. And
You only neurotically think you're being followed. That's
yes. And there are books with some of the more neurotic, super related characters. Most recent is The Joker Psychology, Evil Clowns and the Women Who Love Them. thank you all. I really appreciate it as friends of some of you and fan of all of you. And thank you so much, Danny, for helping pull this together.
Oh, thank you, Travis, for spearheading it. And thanks everybody. Wow, what a pleasure to be here
Thank
with
you.
guys. Holy cow.
And thank you, Comic-Con, and all of you watching it out there. And bye.
All right, stay well, everybody.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
Danny.